Hey all, happy Monday. We are gonna move on a little bit to our next dynasty that we're gonna look at. Before we do though, I want to mention a few things. I have put a Quizlet link onto the end of this module or somewhere in this module. I don't remember exactly where. Covering things we've done since we started China. So some geography stuff, the dynasties, the mandate, have heaven, all that stuff. If you want to play around with it, that is fine. That is up to you. It's here for you if you want it. There is also a notes page in this module that I want you to open up and have out as we go through this. I figured it would be helpful for you all if you had something to write some of this down in, and that will actually be your assignment for today. Is filling in what we did on Friday with the Shang, and then what we're getting ready to do today. So if you would open that up, should be called like the notes page or something, and we will start from there. That will actually be what you turn in for your assignment today. So first off, we're just going to go back over the Shang Dynasty, which is what we talked about on Friday. If you remember, they lasted from 1600 to 1046 BC. They're often seen as the first real Chinese dynasty. If you remember, we mentioned the Shah dynasty and how there's some debate as to whether or not that dynasty is real or whether it actually existed. So we're gonna say for this purpose that it wasn't, and that the Shang is the first. But keep in mind there are a lot of people who would argue that the Shang are the second Chinese dynasty. But the first leader of the Shang was a man named Tang. If you remember, they were well known for their massive cities, inventions of a calendar based on the sun, religious developments, writing, that stuff. They use their knowledge of farming irrigation to support other work in different areas. Remember, that's kind of what we consider to be division of labor. And they also had some pretty great big infrastructure projects, the Great Wall of China, the Grand Canal, those kind of things. And they also developed the earliest known version of writing by using those oracle bones. If you remember, we talked about those on Friday as well. So make sure you have this written in the notes for the Shang, and then we are going to go on into the Zhou, which is our next dynasty. This one lasted from 1046 to 256 BC and is the longest continuous dynasty in Chinese history. So we're looking at about 800 years or so. And they had claimed the mandate of heaven from the Shang. They said that the Shang had lost the support of the god or gods to rule, and that it was their turn to make the gods happy by ruling over China. The first leader of the Zhou dynasty was a man named King Wu. And during this period, the Zhou made advancements in music, poetry, political and religious thought, as well as science. Some notable people from this dynasty include people named Confucius and Sun Tzu. So one of the big things that the Zhou did was they implemented a social structure system. It's the European system of feudalism is pretty much not pretty much it's kind of copied from the Chinese system here. The Chinese system was known as Fengjian, and it was set up so that nobles were given land by the king, and then these nobles had people live on that land and work it for the nobles. Each noble was able to set up his own currency system, his own his own rules and laws, and the only thing the king asked from him was that they had to pay the king taxes, and the king could call on them to provide troops for an army whenever necessary. It's very similar to European feudalism in that sense, in that there were people who worked the land and were allowed to live on that land in exchange for a portion of their crop or their product to the noble, and then the noble just had to report to the king. So this is a very similar system. And they also set up with it a social system, that a hierarchy system, so like power from top to bottom. Remember, this was kind of the way the caste system works in India, and then the way the social structure worked in Mesopotamia too. You had the king at the top, then you had nobles, gentries, your upper middle class people, merchants, laborers, and then all the way down here you had your peasants. So this kind of works power from top to bottom. The king obviously has the most power, then the nobles, then the gentries, the merchants, and so on. So this is one of their big things, was this social system known as Fengxian. Another thing that they were known for is politics and political thought. During the end of the Zhou Dynasty, they started a period known as the Warring States period. During this time period, several groups all claimed to have the mandate of heaven, and pretty soon, as one would expect, civil war started happening. This challenged the Zhou Dynasty economically, politically, and so on. And so a lot of people started offering their own takes on how you could fix it, how you can make it better, whatever. Two of those people we already mentioned were Sun Tzu and Confucius. Sun Tzu took a more military approach to this. He looked at and came up with what he thought were the best ways to start and end a war as quickly as possible and as few lives lost as possible. And it covered all kinds of military tactics, and he felt all military commanders should know or follow these things if they wanted to be successful. And the minute they didn't follow these is the minute they lost a battle of some sort. His book, he wrote a book about his thoughts, and it's known as The Art of War. And it was written around 500 BC or so. And it's still read today across the world. I say we as in like the U.S. military, even reads it or studies it at some of our military academies, such as West Point. So this gives you an idea of how influential this guy was back then. If 2,000, 3,000 years later, people are still reading and studying his books, even with modern technologies and weapons, that tells you this man was onto something. So he's known for his book, The Art of War, that covered military conflicts. The next guy took a more philosophical approach. Hi, kitty. Confucius took a more philosophical approach, as we just said. He lived roughly 550 to 479 BC. And he took the approach that all men and women are naturally good people. But through a failure of moral standards, corruption, bad behavior, whatever, people kind of lost their way, and it caused problems in society that would lead to the destruction of society, the destruction of the dynasties, whatever you want to have it. And so he offered his own philosophical take on how you can fix this. We're not going to look at his today. We're actually going to look at him in a little more detail tomorrow. And I didn't want to like throw a bunch of information at you at the end, just give you a little basics here. But we are going to look at who he is and his kind of philosophical thought in more detail tomorrow. So that is actually all I have for you all today. So if you would, your assignment is just take a screenshot of the first two columns of the notes page. I put a bunch in there because eventually you'll fill in that whole thing. But for now, obviously, we only have the two dynasties. So if you would take a screenshot of that, and that will post and submit that on Canvas, that will be your assignment for today. And then we'll look more at Confucius here tomorrow. So with that being said, if you guys have any questions or needs me to kind of go over something again, let me know, and I will be happy to help you all out. Other than that, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I will see you all tomorrow.